I'm realizing that a lot of us get stuck in other people's perspective when it comes to us, our own growth, our own achievement as people. I think that in a lot of ways, we define ourselves with terms that we've been told by other people without ever giving ourselves a real chance to define ourselves for who we are. I think in recognizing that we are the ones who are permitted to see the internal workings of ourselves, or we are the ones who are able to experience our own thoughts and feelings in a real way. We need to be the ones who, in part, give ourselves some type of definition in reference to one, what we want for ourselves, and one, what we already see abundantly within ourselves internally. I think a lot of us suppress our good natured attributes in our expression to the world because we think that's what makes us vulnerable. We teach ourselves we need to be a very specific way in order to be liked, in order to be loved. So we don't ever put ourselves on the forefront of our attention, the forefront of the world. But I think once we actually do that and start to be authentic to who we are in terms of our expression, we'll see that the world is a lot more accommodating than we previously thought. Not necessarily in the sense that everyone is just going to cheer and jeer and be like, oh my God, I love this new you. But to say that once you love the new you and learn to express it, you'll find people who appreciate that expression too. I think part of the reason we feel some type of distance between us and the lives we lived at times is because we're not the ones who are truly living it. And I don't mean that to say that, who you are is fake, but sometimes we're ingenuine to how we actually feel about the world around us, or ingenuine to how we actually desire to feel about the world around us. And when I say that, I mean that some of us want to look at the world in a positive way. I think some of us want to go out into the world. And I could just speak for myself. I want to go out into the world and look at it in a very beautiful way. I want to be able to sort of not be biased and limited by the thoughts that I have or the thoughts and opinions that other people have about the world in order to derive my happiness from it. When we sort of give ourselves a real person to experience, when we give ourselves a realization that the experience is really about you being you, then we recognize that we only have to focus on our perspective. The objective should be to focus on your perspective. Focus on how you look at things, not how other people look at things, because ultimately how you look at things is going to determine the world that you actually live in. And I think when it comes to ourselves and how we look at ourselves, that's the most important thing that can be. Because how you view yourself is how you view the world. And how you view yourself is how you're going to view your capabilities and how you're going to see your opportunities. I think a lot of us, if we were to be already at our end goal, we would feel a lot more capable. And I think the only thing stopping our capability is our relative distance from its quote unquote achievability, or us thinking that it can't be achieved, or us thinking that it's not achieved, or we're not ready to achieve it, or we're not the right person for it right now. And I think with anything, we need to learn how to invest in ourselves. Invest enough care into our mind, body, soul, and everything that we do. And recently, I've been trying to do this a lot more intentionally, like actually doing the things I need to do to take care of myself, even when it somewhat feels laborsome sometimes. But the labor is only in reference to the things we're not doing. Sometimes it's just a reference to who our ego has convinced ourselves to be. And I think when it comes to self-care, we need to be very intentional with what we do for ourselves, very intentional with what it brings, and also believing in the potency of the medicine we prescribe to ourselves through our action, through our care, through whatever we do for us. Which is why I'm thankful that Teach Hanley is sponsoring this video today. If you guys are unfamiliar with Teach Hanley, is there an uncomplicated skincare brand for men? When I first started focusing on my own skincare, focusing on my self-care, I think intentionally, is when I truly saw some real changes in who I was. Not necessarily just in terms of my expression, but how I was looking. And they sent me over the level 1 system, which it includes a wash, a PM and AM moisturizer, as well as a scrub. I use these daily. I've been using it for it feels like a month or 6 months to a year. I don't really sure. I've been using it as long as I can really remember. So if you guys are interested in anything like that in regards to skincare, I would please check them out. And since Teach Hanley is a sponsor for today's video, they're offering an amazing deal for you all. You can save up to 40% off your first box today and get a gift valued at $20, which I would select the exfoliating brush. And you can sign up to get a 20% off for life if you sign up as a member via the link that I have in my description. Overall, I think that when we're talking about self-care, it's really about what it does for you. Not necessarily just in an external sense, but in an internal sense, in a sense of actually doing the things that will take care of you and affirming yourself through that and giving yourself some type of affirmation through the care that you give yourself. I think once we learn to do that, then it stops being a chore to care for yourself. It stops being an obligation and starts being something you can look forward to. And I don't even think it's just in the spectrum of skincare or self-care in the physical sense, but mental sense too. Reading a book maybe you like to read, or doing some type of mental activity that you like to do just for the sake of you like doing it. Learning to live life in reference to your own likes and dislikes, I think is a very important thing, because we often live in reference to other people's likes. I think in a societal sense, we're told to like many things. And those many things aren't necessarily things we even have, acute possession of, really. We're told to want these very luxurious things, these very high level, high price, whatever. And a lot of us have not even touched those things. So how can we even determine that that's something we truly want? Just off its appearance, just off of what it's told, just off of the value we're convinced of. And if we're recognizing that value can be convinced on something that's just there, then we recognize that the value we place on ourselves is just in reference to our perspective of it. And that's why I think it's about how you look at things. It's about focusing on how you look at things. And recently I've been trying to focus on how I look in terms of making sure I'm integrating positivity into my perspective, learning that to actually carry, the love I have for myself, the self-care, the love that other people may have for me into every situation, into every experience I have. We need to recognize that the moment, I feel, is constantly being etched into. We're constantly creating the future in the present. And if we want our future to be exemplary of any type of positive emotion, any type of positive thing, then it's about us bringing that positivity into the moment and allowing it to etch into the future and etch into ourselves. And what I've realized is when you learn to carry a certain amount of positivity, when you learn to actually give yourself back the moment and give yourself an opportunity to sort of enjoy it, you'll see a lot more things to enjoy. I feel like the world sort of gives to you exactly what you give to the world. And all you have to give to the world is a certain feeling, vibration, perspective, idea. When you feel good enough about your life for an extended period of time, you're going to continue to experience good things. You're going to continue to bring good things into your life off of essence of you vibrating on that level, or you in essence of manifesting that thing via your view. A good thing will be able to see good things. Just as if you have a very negative perspective, a very negative mindset, you're more likely to see negativity present within the world, even in subtle things, even in small acts. If you feel bad about yourself, someone could say something about someone else and you could take it personally. There are so many things that are sort of limited in our inability to see ourselves, our inability to give ourselves a real chance to be in the world that we inhabit, a real chance to be who we are with love. I talk about self-love pretty often, but I think it's genuinely important. If you're not going to love yourself, then there's no obligation or expectation for anyone else to do the same. And I already think we shouldn't really base our feelings in expectation, but in what we're able to give ourselves and what's here. If you base your gratitude on expectation on something that is that's not currently within your view, then you sort of lose it sometimes, especially if you're only being grateful in reference to it actually being here. I think we can be grateful for what is yet to come. I genuinely do think so, but I think it's about investing it in the present, recognizing that we shouldn't dampen who we are and dampen our happiness in reference to what we don't have, and learn to appreciate ourselves for what we have yet to gain, because it's not about, the object itself, but what it does for you, and feeling valuable in who you are enough to actually go out there and get it and do the things that are necessary. And I think one of the most necessary things that we have for ourselves is our ability to posit some type of affirmation in who we are. Our ability to see past some of the junk that we've convinced ourselves over the years in terms of who we are. Like, I definitely feel like there was a stark change in who I was. I wouldn't say in this past year, but over the past couple years, and I think, there are some people who might look at me and say, well, you haven't really changed that much, or you're this, but it's not really about them. It's about how I'm looking at me, how I've added depth to the perspective I have of myself. I think a lot of us don't recognize the depth and complexity we all have as individuals. I think we can recognize that everyone else has a lot of complexity, especially if we grant themselves enough of an open ear. And I think some people may think they're the only one with complexity. But I think it's when you allow everyone to sort of have their own, including you, that you actually get the opportunity to live out yours. If you recognize that everyone has their own life to live, then you have no obligation to live in the lives of others, but in the lives that you've actually been gifted. And what that means to me is actually taking part in the life that you live. You know, being an active participant rather than a distant observer to the life that you are experiencing. You know, when we are stuck in that observation mentality and just watching life unfold, it doesn't really do anything for us. Like it's like in a lot of ways we're just waiting on um ourselves to enjoy life. What do we have to gain from waiting to enjoy the experience that we've been given? And I don't mean that to say that there's not a fair share of ills in the world. I'm recognizing more than anything that the world has ugliness to it. But that doesn't mean that we have to be ugly along with it. You can learn to look at the world in a beautiful way and still acknowledge certain negative things, but recognize that they don't have to take you away from your positivity. They don't have to dampen your vibration or the person that you are and the characteristics that you bring. You know, you can still learn to smile. You can still learn to be you. You know, and it's about not defining yourself in reference to everything around you, not defining yourself in reference to so many things that aren't you, and learning to have some type of definition for who you are. Learning to look in a certain way and focusing on how you look rather than how other people look at it. And I'm not saying that to say, you know, you have to be 100% delusional and not recognize when things are dangerous and not recognize when things are taking away from certain things or when you're being mean or unbefitting to other people or even to yourself. But to say being so intently loving to yourself and positive that you're not going to block those things in negligence. You're going to actually open your eyes enough to see them so you can lead yourself to more positivity and lead yourself in a direction that's actually going to benefit you in your overall growth and progression as an individual. Like for me, I've been writing a lot, I've been reading a lot, and I've been honestly just trying to give myself a chance to properly relax. You know, I think sometimes when we do have big goals, big ideas, big dreams, big things that we want to achieve, we sort of put ourselves on a time crunch. You know, we sort of live on this basis of time and don't give ourselves affirmation until a certain amount of time has passed or unless we do things within a certain framework of time. And I think in that way, our expectations are constantly enforced by this idea of time. And of course, there are certain deadlines we must reach. But when it comes to ourselves, we have to give ourselves a chance to relax, a chance to be ourselves without any limitation. And I think, you know, to a certain extent, what I hope to achieve is to be able to do that at all times. You know, learn to appreciate everything for what it is. And I think it's a very easy thing to do. I think it's a hard thing to maintain because it's a constant choice. It's you constantly choosing over and over again to choose positivity, to live in a world of your own creation and learn not to reference things. But I think we're taught to reference. We're taught to infer this from this. And that's okay. I think it's important to recognize how our brain works so we can use it in our favor. If we can recognize that our thoughts can govern the way we feel, and we can recognize that we can input certain thoughts in our head, then it's just about being present enough to insert thoughts that benefit. And, you know, that presence, I feel like, is a muscle that is constantly strengthened. The more apt we are to using our consciousness in a certain way, the more our subconscious is going to accept that that's the way it should be used. And the way that we have been using it, I think, is just for us to recognize that we've been using it in that way, consciously. You know, sometimes we're conscious in the moment and we constantly think about negative things. We think about how this could go this way, how that could go this way. And all it does is really take us away from our moment. You know, I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on things that are outside of our control, but recognize that when it's not in your control, it should not take away from your happiness in a subtle way. You know, I think we should all focus our attention on areas where we can influence. But if we have absolutely zero influence, it's about being where we are and waiting on an opportunity to influence something in our favor. You may not be able to control the exact event that takes place, but you can control your reaction to it. You can't control what follows suit to a certain extent as long as you are a part of the situation and as long as you can control yourself. Because if you're a part of every situation you encounter and you can control yourself, then you can, in essence, control the situation. And I think that's truly how influence works. Learning how to use yourself in a way that's befitting of a situation, use yourself in a way that allows you to see the world for what it is and see it for what it could be rather than what it was and what you don't want it to be.